Wow, so I haven't touched my laptop since last week's video except to clean it, because I had COVID. It turns out that's what it was. Over the worst part, quarantine's over. I was not back to where I was, but I'm way better than I was. So I can do this video. Yeah. This is Chucky, Season 2, Episode 6. He is risen indeed. And Andy, in this episode, has the perfect quote to sum up my feelings on this episode. And that quote is, "What the fuck is this?" That's my exact thoughts. So speaking to Andy, this episode picks up where the other one left off, and I was wrong. It wasn't human Charles Lee Ray or anything. I was fucked up. I was sick. I was wrong. It was Andy with the long hair and the beard. Turns out the evil Chucky, the Colonel, was cutting him up and eating him, I guess. And it said he's been there for a year. So for a year, it's been cutting up Andy and eating him, and Andy's still around. It's a strong dude. And Mixter is there, the therapist. It turns out he's Charles Lee Ray's therapist from when he was a kid, which I would not have guessed because how old must he be? And so they have a conversation, and Mixter takes evil Chucky, the Colonel, the bald Chucky, who it is confirmed, the same bald Chucky from earlier on in the first episode of Season 2, takes him to the church so he can start to try to murder the kids. And the kids sneak in, they take Andy back to the church, which provides a great excuse for why they came back. And then Andy backs him up. Church takes him in with some kind of resistance from Devin Sawa, but the church takes him in regardless, and they take care of him. So now Andy's at this church, the Colonel's at this church, and other people will be on their way to the church, but that's depending on. So it looks like we're setting something up. So at the church, then we cut to Glenda and Kyle and Nika / Chucky. And she's Nika, she's having a conversation with Glenda and Kyle. And Kyle's like, "Can I talk to him?" She's like, "Yeah." And so Kyle makes herself bleed to bring out Chucky. She asks out Andy. Chucky says he killed him, which is not true, obviously. And Andy tries to get Glenda to murder Kyle, but then Kyle knocks out Chucky to bring back Nika. Led to a funny line, which, if anything, was the strength in this episode, the humor. Like, that was the real thing, not much else. Yeah. So then, then on the news, you hear that Jennifer Tilly's wanted for murder. And my questions were answered. This universe, no more Joel Pilot, the dude from The Matrix and Bad Boys. And no more, and there's no more Meg Tilly. I'm like, okay. But what about Gina Gershon? So yeah. And there's a manhunt for Jennifer Tilly and Glenn, and the house burned down. You saw the previous episode. So yeah. And I'm beginning to realize what a lot of people are realizing. That, my goodness, this is getting way out of hand. Not just with that, but with the religious stuff, but pinning that. But yeah, so we're back at the church, and the nun that found Buff Chucky, she's cleaning his feet because somebody cleaned Jesus' feet in the Bible. So yeah, and that's the name of the show, He Is Risen. So, and she cleaned his feet, and she's talking to Buff Chucky, and she says out loud that Chucky is the Lord and Savior. I'm like, ooh, okay. And then begins, at least for me, the religion and Christianity and kind of bashing, because Devin has a conversation, because Devin and Jake are having a conversation like later on in the episode where shit's happening, people are showing up, and Jake's like, all our darkness, maybe we need some light. Devin's like, if that's more religious nonsense, I'm not in the mood. You need to cause it bullshit. I'm like, okay. Yeah. So after that, After that, the Colonel and no, after that, shit. Yeah, after that, the kids talk and try to form a strategy, I suppose, and uh, then it cuts to the other nun with Buff Chucky. She takes him to Devon Sawa, and she's talking about that the Lord is risen. That's him. And Devon Sawa's like, no. After I said get rid of that dog, why does everyone have a dog? He's still very resistant about the whole Chucky thing, despite the fact more and more dogs are coming in mysteriously, each one out with a gimmick, it seems. He's still resistant against it, and oh boy. Anyway, and he tells her to leave and everything, and then we cut to Buff Chucky about to fight the Colonel Chucky, and the Colonel does this monologue, and then there's some more stuff. Colonel Chucky does this monologue, quoting General George S. Patton. If you are here in the States and you actually pay attention in history class, or if you're myself, you're a history buff, or if you just like American history, this is an episode, because he just starts quoting General George S. Patton. I'm like, oh my goodness. Like, I'm a history buff, and I'm like, dear goodness. But it does lead to a funny line after he winds up murdering Buff Chucky. Which again, the humor is a strong point, and he does it with arsenic. I've never seen a dog be murdered via arsenic, but that's happened. Didn't even put a finger on him. And then the kids strategize and get ready, and we see Good Chucky, which is officially what he's called. He does give Lexi more drugs, talking about here's something to help you out, and she hesitates at first, but it's like thanks. And I've always had one eye on Good Chucky. That's how that, and I'm like, okay, pinning that. And then they're all strategizing what they're gonna do, and then of course what I said earlier with the whole Devin and anti-Christianity stuff, which is it's apparent in this one. But yeah, and then they leave the door unlocked after a brief argument, and of course the Colonel, they've been built up for episodes, and now finally shows up, meets the kids, and once again starts quoting historical figures. He does "Give me liberty" or "Give me death." And he starts quoting historical things, the horror, after he stabbed in the back of the head with scissors we saw Andy pick up earlier. And he just says the horror repeatedly, like when the Hindenburg crashed. And then that's interspliced with like a side of a chopper flying over a war zone that's fired. It's basically the opening of Mass with a different theme song. Yeah. That's what he does. And it's like, he shows up, it's like he should have cut deeper. And then the Colonel finally, I guess, succumbs to his wounds. And wow, he was built up so well. And when he's finally in action, he's literally made a joke and has no kills. Wow. And then Andy sees the kids ready for combat, and sees Good Chucky, and he says what I said earlier. What the fuck is this? Right? And also this Nadine, Lexi's roommate, she was great in this episode. Like, she really was. Poor girl became the kill in this episode at the hands of, I'm skipping. Rewind. So Andy tries to murder Good Chucky, but the kids just stop him, but Andy's like, no, fuck that, it's Chucky. There's no Good Chucky. Which, pitting that. And then Mixter shows up with a gun, locks him in the room, takes the Colonel, and is about to leave when she runs into Devin Sawa, the Black Nun. And not the Colonel, I'm sorry, she's with Good Chucky. She takes Good Chucky, and she runs into Devin Sawa and the Colonel. not the colonel. She runs into Devon Sawa and the black nun, and Good Chucky starts like trying to call for help. Like, well, she's kidnapping me, and Mixer's like, oh, I do even do because I'm true. And they're like, well, there's also. And Chucky tries, Good Chucky tries to reach for her gun. She tries to stop it, accidentally shoots Black Nun, drops Good Chucky, who runs away, screaming help, she's trying to kill me. And Devon Sawa sees it, Black Nun sees it, and everybody's just scattered. Nadine runs off, scared, with Good Chucky. Winds up locking him and her in some kind of tower. And the other kids are trying to get in there. They finally do. And then it happens. Good Chucky like straight up murders Nadine. And the voice change that Brad Dourif did was, I'll give it that, good voice change from the soft voice that Good Chucky has to like Chucky's voice. That was good. I'll give it that. But then he's immediately like, oh no, what did I do? And I'm like, this ain't no Jekyll and Hyde bull. No, it's Chucky. Andy was right. Fuck this. No. Like, nobody really thought he was Good Chucky anyway. After I do this Jekyll and Hyde thing. Like, no. And then Devon Sawa asks Black Nun, did you see that? And she's like, yeah. He's like, where are you psychologically? And she's like, call the police. And he's like, no, call the Vatican. This is really starting to feel like a sequel to See the Chucky. Call the Vatican. The Vatican, yes, they have a telescope, because yes, they're tied to ufology, but evil possessed dolls, I think, come on. I get it because it's possessed and everything, and the voodoo, but come on. And so, yeah, and then we see, Nika, but as Chucky, with Kyle, driving on their way to the church after Mixer called Nika Chucky, but as Chucky. They're like, we'll be there before midnight, so they're on the way to the church. And Nika as Chucky, Kyle didn't want to be there. That's kind of funny. And then, as he asks the question, like, what up with the wig? Right? Because, yeah, Kyle got pretty messed up. And her glasses, when she takes them off, one of her ears come off. Like, why don't do that? I've never seen that before, but yeah. And then Glenda is driving, and I never expected this to happen. I almost mentioned it last week, but again, I was just trying to finish that video. I almost mentioned this last week. I wish I did. When Glenn talks, they're using the voice, the same voice from See the Chucky, which I would have never expected at all. That threw me. And they have this look on their face too. I'm like, oh, I did not expect that. Bringing back Glenn Glenda, that's one thing. That voice actor. If I felt stuff, I'm sure other people felt stuff too. Like, there's maybe too much, you know? Like, my goodness. So, yeah. And then in the trailer, we see a bit of the Silence of the Lambs mixed with The Exorcist, which is a combination, if I ever saw one. So, yeah, I did not dig this episode really at all. Good comedy. That's about it. This is the most Seed of Chucky out of all the episodes thus far. My goodness. I was starting to see where I was talking about the Christianity badge, because Christianity and, you know, the LGBTQ community don't exactly see on the same page. Like, I've like, as a Christian myself, I've heard pastors say some things about the LGBTQ community. I'm like, well, no, that wasn't very Christian of us, was it? That's a whole, like, yeah, I understand that, and Diamond said he's an atheist, and he's gay. I understand that. And up until this point, I would argue that this whole series is pretty tame compared to, say, David Cross stand-up special. Talk about bashing Christianity, my goodness. But this episode either I'm finally noticing, or this is where they really started to do it. I was digging that. Now, as a Christian, just as a regular viewer, I'm like, why? And they had all this other stuff, to Jekyll and Hyde element, to the Colonel quoting historical American figures despite having a German accent. And then weirdly quoting Star Trek 2 the Wrath of Khan. If I have to say which quote, you're on the wrong channel. And after that quote, Lexi's like, who the hell is that? I'm like, children. But yeah, you got that. You got the Dirty Fertility / Tiffany stuff. You got, and I found the Nika Chucky stuff. What else you got? Again, the Dirty Fertility Tiffany stuff. The others are doing something silly with Glenn and Glenda, it looks like. What the fuck? Exactly. Like Andy said, what the fuck is this? There's no other aspect of religion thing, and there's a lot happening. There's a lot of commentary in this episode, like a lot over multiple subjects. Maybe it's because I'm still recovering. I could, man. It's almost too much for me. Like, my goodness. Bringing the Vatican, the war commentary for no reason at all. The false prophet, I get it. It's all so much. How many times have we seen a property throw in so much in a sequel and it just fail? I don't want this to fail, okay? I'll say this, it has me interested to see what happens next. Like, my goodness. Anyway, that's it. Thank you for watching. Glad to be back.